Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Global Studies and Governance Program at IUB, I would like to welcome all of you to the third Global Day and today's panel on Bangabandhu and Bangladesh's foreign policy. We all know that this year is a very auspicious for all Bangladeshis as we are celebrating the birth centenary of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. To celebrate it, GSG program is holding a Bangabandhu essay contest at 3 levels: high school, university, and scholars. As a part of the third event, we have collated few papers from the scholars and designed this panel and another panel in the evening on which GSG is expected to have a book later in this year. We are very happy to have our esteemed Vice Chancellor, Acting Professor Milan Pagan, to inaugurate the Global Day. We are also delighted to have Honorable Ambassador Muhammad Zamir to chair today's panel and Honorable Ambassador Tariq Karim as discussant of the panel today. Now may I request Vice Chancellor Sir, Professor Milan Pagan to share his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akhtar. On behalf of IUB, I would like to welcome all of the participants and all of the others that are watching this on the web. You see, I'm definitely not an expert on Bangabandhu or Bangladesh or the foreign policy, but I would like to emphasize that it is the purpose of the university to make sure that we prepare the leaders for tomorrow. And you cannot prepare the leaders for tomorrow if they don't understand the past, if they don't know where they're coming from. So it is very important that we have events like this where the history, the past, the role of individuals in that past has been clearly explained, and people then understand what are the reasons for the situation that we have now, where we, as I said, where we're coming from, and then we can make informed decisions about how to proceed. On a personal note, I can tell you when I was in Dubai and I was considering coming to Bangladesh for a few years, reading about the history of Bangladesh and learning about Bangabandhu and his role definitely tipped the scale. So I said, this is an amazing nation that went from being declared as a basket case to the nation that is now the upcoming Asian tiger. So definitely knowing about what was happening in the past influenced my decision. That's on the personal level. But as the university, as I said, it is our role to make sure that everybody in Bangladesh and broader understands this. The topic that we're discussing today is very, very important because in this interconnected world, it doesn't just matter what is happening within the country, but it is equally or even more important, how is that country placed in the on the global scale? What are the relations of the country with others? Because that's the break it or make it of the success of the country. So today's topic of the Bangabandhu and Bangladesh foreign policy, I hope will be very informative. And I can say that our global studies and governance really managed to get the most appropriate people here together who could shed light on these topics. Now, one thing I learned in my from my experience is that I never welcome people by name, because then I always miss somebody and there's always some bad feeling. So everybody is very, very welcome. And I wish that we will have a very, very productive session. And even more importantly, that out of this, a publication will come. So even those people who will not be able to attend today, they will be able to read, they will be able to get educated, and they will be able to think about the future in the light of what happened in the past. So without further ado, let's proceed with our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable views. Now, I would like to request Ambassador Muhammad Zamir to say something and to chair today's panel. Sir, over to you.
Uh, Good afternoon, and may I first of all thank Professor Pagan for his very constructive approach, which he has indicated in his remarks. It's a wonderful thing for the IUB to have someone who has broad dimensions in terms of facets. It's not easy, it's very difficult. But to be able to understand the various denotations and connotations and then to move forward is something which I always used to say when I was teaching as a teacher in Dhaka University. This is 54 years ago, that uh, there's always the whole problem is there's always a least common denominator, and people seem to forget that. So they always try to sharpen one side of the coin without by forgetting that there's also the other side of the coin. So today I am very, I must admit, I'm very honored that I have been asked to participate in this discussion about someone whom I had the great honor to work with when he had come back from his internment in Pakistan, and he came back. I met him again not for the first time. First time I met Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was in 1958. But later on, I met him because my wife and myself had sought political asylum in London, and he came on the 8th of January 1972, and we met him there, 1972, and we met him there in the Claridge's Hotel. And later on, before I left, he said, "You must come back to Dhaka, and I need you there." So I came back to Dhaka on the 21st of January in 1972, and it was through a flight which came from London to Moscow and from Moscow to Dhaka through Aeroflot. And what surprises me even today is, in those days, they said the price of the ticket was very high. And I said, "How much is it?" It was 85 pounds one way. So that was not very high according to most of us. But when I came back, I went to see him on the 22nd of January 1972. And the man who called me was at that time Mr. Rafiqullah Chaudhry. He was the father of he was the father of our present speaker, and he was at that time the principal secretary of Prime Minister Bangabandhu, and he called me to his house in Road 32. And the reason I'm saying all of this is that on the 10th, when he arrived in Dhaka, I was not here. I was at that time in London. But I came back, and the first thing I heard was everyone is talking about his references that he had made in Delhi when he had arrived in Delhi on his way to Dhaka. And then later on, when he arrived in Dhaka and he addressed more than nearly 1 million people in Sarwadi Uddan in Ramna, and what he said there. Now, I'm telling you what he said in the Palam airport on 10th January. He described his journey. It's very interesting. He described his journey to a free Bangladesh as, within quotation, a journey from darkness to light, from captivity to freedom, from desolation to hope. So it was always saying that the glass is not half empty, the glass is half full. And that is very important for all of us to understand. Because in those days, Dhaka was in a miserable situation. There was nothing available here. And for him to come and to have a constructive approach makes things totally something different. Now, after that, he also reiterated that he was going back to an independent country, and then he quote, "Not with hatred in my heart for anyone, but with the satisfaction that truth has at last triumphed over falsehood, sanity over insanity, courage over cowardice, justice over injustice, and good over evil," quote unquote. Now, this was totally spontaneous when he had arrived in Tejgaon airport and he had not gone home to see his family. He was taken from there straight to Ramna, where he made this very, very great oratory statement. And now, after his return, I remember on the 22nd, he asked me, he said, in Bengali, he said, he used to call me Tui. Tui, তোকে আমি ভারতের ডেস্ক দেখার জন্য আমি বিশেষভাবে তোকে অনুরোধ করছি। And this is, you have to be the person who looks after the India desk in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I said, yes, of course, it would be a great honor and great pleasure. I was a director. And so that's how the first file on India started in the foreign ministry. And it all started with, the whole idea was, as he later on pursued it, Mr. J.N. Dixit at that time was acting High Commissioner of India. Mr. Shuvimal Datta had still not arrived. And Mr. Dixit had come to try to tell me what to do about the lots of people of Hindu origin who were coming back and finding lots of things that happened to their houses or to their fields and things like that. And they had gone to the Indian High Commission. So I said, why should they go to your High Commission? They should have gone, we are an independent country. They should have gone to our police station and filed an FIR and a GD entry, and we would have looked into it. So what Bangabandhu did was, when J.N. Dixit went to meet him with this point, he said, I will tell you this, that we are an independent country, the same thing, and it is important for us to remember that, because Pakistan at that time was telling everyone that it's no use recognizing Bangladesh as an independent country because they'll soon become a part of India, as a province of India. And that is one of the reasons why Bangabandhu, when he went in the first week of February 1972 to Calcutta, to Gauder Math, he addressed everyone, and then later, after, in a separate meeting with Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who was being accompanied by Mr. D.P. Dhar and Mr. P.N. Haksar and Salman Haider, my old friend, who was the private secretary to Indira Gandhi, he told them, and they told Indira Gandhi, that when will you, we are very, very honored that you came and helped us to get our independence through our joint efforts, but it's time you took all your troops back home. And Indira Gandhi said, she was very surprised. But Indira Gandhi said, okay. She went and talked to the people in a separate room. And she said, she came out and told Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, this will be our birthday gift to you, because his birthday was 17th of March. You have invited me to Dhaka. I'll come to Dhaka on the 15th of March, 1972. But before that, all our troops who are presently in Bangladesh will return with the prisoners of war back to India. And that is what happened. And once that happened, it created the necessary paradigm for Bangladesh to say that, yes, India helped us, but we are partners. We were partners, we are still partners, but we are an independent country. And that is what raised the number of countries who had recognized Bangladesh. Jara Shikriti diyechilo, it jumped from there all the way to nearly 70, and then later on to 124. Now, this was, I will say, this was the more important aspect of Bangabandhu, because he could see the different dimensions. The next thing which he did was, after he returned to Dhaka, I remember he had this huge problem in front of him. And we had 6 of us. We used to go and sit down with him in what was Gana Bhavan in those days, which is presently the Foreign Affairs Training Institute at the top of the road in Berry Road. And we used to sit there, talk and sit down. And he thanked everyone for their efforts. But at the same time, he said, we need to really, really seriously try and restore the various aspects of infrastructure and also improve our economic activity, infrastructural connectivity, the agricultural process, the educational institutional facilities, and healthcare. I'm talking about education because this is something which he gave special emphasis on. He was very keen on Dhaka University because that was the most important university at that time. There was no other important university, not in the private sector at all. But he said there was the engineering university, but there was also Dhaka University. Now, he said that we have to look at education first and foremost. And this was his approach towards life. And I will suggest to all of you that if you can, there was a special decision made by him, because when we had the Bijoy Divos, the Victory Day in 1971 on 16th of December, Bangabandhu was still not in Dhaka. He was still in internment. But in order to facilitate the first anniversary of the Victory Day on the 16th of December 1972, he asked for the formation of an editorial committee to publish a book called Bangladesh. As a member of that 6-member committee, it included Abdul Ghaffar Chaudhry, it included also Burhanuddin Khan Jahangir, and it included Nurul Islam Patwari, Syed Ali Hassan, and 2 others. Now, we created that book, but the interesting thing about that was, he was very angry with the editorial board. He called us and said, "How dare you do this?" Because when we made the draft copy and had taken it to him, we had placed his photograph as the first photograph, followed by that of Justice Abu Said Chaudhry, who was then the president of Bangladesh. He said, "How can you put me ahead of the president? The president always comes first. So you remove my photograph and make it in page 2. So that was what he was in terms of democracy and democratic rights. I cannot imagine this happening in many countries of the world today. Subsequently, I had the great honor of him also noticing, because we talked about people who were stranded in Pakistan. There were about 373,000 people of Bangladeshi origin who were in internment camps in various parts of West Pakistan, and he wanted them back. And then he asked, at that time, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Kurt Waldheim, to do something about it. And that is when a repatriation committee was formed, of which he was the chairman. And the repatriation committee was formed with the help of Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan, who was at that time the Director General of the UNHCR. So he came to Dhaka. I received him in April 1972. And he then asked for, and he got Sergio Vieira de Mello, who came here as, he was then a P2 officer in UNHCR, and Kofi Annan. And that's how the UNRWA came into place, United Nations Relief Operation Dhaka, and the repatriation committee, of which Bangabandhu was the chairman, I was the member secretary. But all of this eventually led to his contribution over the fight which took place between Syria and Egypt and Israel. It also, I was made part of that entire fight. Then, of course, of the OIC, where I went to Lahore with him, and we became member of the OIC organization. Then in between, there was a non-aligned summit. So at every opportunity, I then had the opportunity of receiving in Dhaka President Tito and his wife Bianca Tito. And then we went to Savar to set up the foundation stone for the Savar memorial, the memorial which is there. But at every opportunity, he was kind, he was compassionate, but he was also very firm. So when I listen to all of you today, I am hoping that I'll be able to learn something which you have already prepared for yourself. And it is a great honor for me that I have been asked to come and share my views today. And may I now ask, because I have been given that I had 2 minutes, but that was 2.5 minutes ago. So I'm now requesting for the next person to come on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for your valuable inputs. Now we are moving towards our presentations of today's panelists. We have 4 panelists today, and I would like to request that each panelist will have 10 minutes to, not 10 minutes, 8 minutes to share their views, their preliminary findings, and the methodology they want to use to investigate their research questions. So the first presenter, I would like to welcome Nahian Reza Sabriet, Center for Genocide Studies, University of Dhaka. Over to you, Nahian. You have 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to share my screen.
Could you please a bit louder, because we cannot hear you properly.
Can you hear me now?
A bit, yeah, good.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I would like to start my presentation, wishing all of you a very good afternoon. And I am Nahian. I'm going to talk about a constructivist take on Bangabandhu's foreign policy and leadership. Now, I would like to start my presentation with two poems, because as I'm going to talk about constructivism, we all know that Bangladeshi or Bengali people are all about poems, literature, art, and our culture is so full of that. And here are two sections or two factions of poem from my favorite poet, Nirmalendu Gun. And you can see, I would like to just flag two separate lines. First, you can see the ভোর থেকে জনসমুদ্রের উদ্যান সৈকতে কখন আসবে কবি. So basically, here the poet is referring to the politician or the leader of Bangladesh as a poet. And in the next poem, you can see there is the reference to গোলাপের একটি গোলাপ গতকাল আমাকে বলেছে আমি যেন কবিতায় শেখ মুজিবের কথা বলি. And then there is the same thing about a brick. So I will go further into that because we're going to talk about the physical world, material world, and how constructivism binds them all together. But let me move on to my research question and research methodology. It's very simple. My research question is just how does constructivism explain Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's foreign policy and leadership? And for the methodology, it's mainly a qualitative approach, and I'm going to use both primary and secondary materials, including newspaper articles, reports, and other journal articles or books from different scholars. Now, for the theoretical embodiment, since we are going to talk about constructivism, it's obviously about identities, interests, and interactions. I'm not going further into that, but my theoretical embodiment depends on Martin M. Chemers' argument on leadership and constructivism. He has identified three different variables, which are image management, relationship development, and utilizing group process for resource deployment. And I'm going to evaluate his three variables in the case of Bangladesh and the leadership of Bangabandhu. Martin M. Chemers is a professor of psychology and organization and leadership, I guess currently at the University of California. Now, here I'm taking the advantage of constructivism or the gray area where it belongs to explore the new area, which is the quantum social science. Now, why quantum social science? Basically, we all know that quantum social science is kind of relevant to the quantum theories of physics and how social science sees the differences between classical social science and the new formations of social science we find in the scholarly articles. Now, first of all, the difference basically is that it focuses more on micro aspects of whether it is leadership or it can be about foreign policy. And for a leader like Bangabandhu, for a political figure like Bangabandhu, we cannot just confine him within the classical social science approaches. So let's go further and let's explore these areas. And for the key aspects, I want to flag some things like the quantum social science basically focuses on the interactions which have very micro or quantum aspects, and the actors mainly belong to a space of shared meaning and where ideas become the more prevalent aspects or prominent areas. And there are interactions and interactions which are in the more internal levels and in between the actors or different factions of actors. When it comes to decoherence, the idea is about the broader brains. And when you read articles about quantum social science, they will basically say that society doesn't have brain. The brains belong to the humans. So it comes from the idea of humans and how they interact in between. So here I'm going to talk about how the ideas of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman has created this entire concept of Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is a concept, Bangladesh is an image, and Bangladesh is also a country. And now here is the interaction with the environment. So we are moving beyond the structure agent debate because it's also a very parsimonious idea. And when we talk about environment, it brings in more broader aspect. And finally, we can see that identities should not be seen as open-ended, but there are some key areas or some structures which make the behavior of identities of particular areas more prevalent than others, like master identities and other aspects, which is also the idea of Alexander Wendt, one of the major exponents of constructivism and also quantum social science. Now let's talk about the images. I will just skim through these areas. First of all, I'm going to refer to Bangabandhu's quotes about guns, powers, and process, which he referred to in one of his interviews. So why this matters? Because when he went to international platforms, he made clear distinctions between the source of power of Bangladeshis and the power of the colonial Pakistani bodies. Because according to him, the power which gave the Pakistani regimes at that particular moment authority was based on guns. And the power which gave Bangladeshis the power was from a gradual process. And then he gave the focus on emancipation. If you look at Bangabandhu's different purviews, different interviews, you can see that he always talked about emancipation, and he had been clear about the idea of emancipation. In an interview with Associated Press, he said that independence comes as an idea which is complementary to emancipation. So always he has connected other ideas to the broader ideas of emancipation. Now, here is an example of the London rally, which came when the repatriation of the who were in exile.
Nahian, you have 1 more minute.
Okay,
Sorry.
ma'am. Okay. So I will just skim through it. Then when people made protest for the Bangladeshi people in London, then we see the constitution was made within 9 months. And then Bangabandhu identified the idea of durable peace when he accepted the Julio Curie Medal. And this idea of peace was more than something. And we all know that Bangabandhu was a feminist as well. And then he also been credited for as the symbol of idealism in Commonwealth in August 1973. I will just move here, just some key areas. We all know the friendship to all, malice to none, and these ideas, but here is an idea of non-alignment, which was basically more like a Cold War centric idea. But we can see that Bangabandhu used that in the case of the South Asian arms race in 1973. And he said that we could use that in the case because we want friendship to everybody. And here is another thing, which is the Think East, which I named it because when we talk about look East policies, it's always a very China-centric idea. Some of the scholars think that when we talk about look East policies, it started when we started thinking about China. But if you look at in November 1973, Bangabandhu was very clear about our relationship with Japan, and it was also derived from our economic interest. And there were also the connection between the balancing Washington and Moscow. And then we had other non-state actors like IMF, World Bank, WHO, and they came forward. Now, when we talk about the resource deployment and mobilizing the common people, you see the multitude of the other areas like Polish Bangladesh Pact, the Malaysian rubber plantation, which are some
Nahian, we are extremely sorry. You have to wrap
Okay.
up. You have few more
Yeah,
seconds.
ma'am. I just have only one slide. Okay. And then we can see that here is a very important thing. The small village in Suffolk, East England, there were the commoners, the people, they were actually accumulating resources for Bangladeshi people. And it was in the British High Commission's press release. So we can see that Bangabandhu had that much of rage coming together for Bangladesh, the idea of Bangladesh, and for the betterment of Bangladesh. Finally, here is the food for thought that which is very Leibniz metaphysics, that collective consciousness versus collective unconsciousness, which is that why we are now in a situation that we have so much complexities to bring everyone together. So we have to think about collective consciousness from the ideas of Bangabandhu, and can we implement that? That's the food for thought for everyone, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nahi and Reza. Now we are moving to our second paper, Bangabandhu in the United Nations. We have Dr. A.K.M. Jasimuddin, Professor, Department of History, Jahangirnagar University, and we have Syed Abu Taweb Shakir, Associate Professor, Department of History, Jahangirnagar University. I know that Syed Abu So Shakir, you are going to start the presentations and your colleague will join later. So altogether you have, again, 9 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for considering one extra minute. Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the organizers and everyone for inviting us in this wonderful webinar with the title Bangabandhu and Bangladesh's Foreign Policy. As the time is very limited and we have a race against the time, I would like to uh, talk about in brief about the issues of the response of the first speech given by Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in the United Nations. And my colleague, Professor Akim Joshimuddin, will start the discussion with the analytical part of the speech of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Professor Akim Joshimuddin will talk a bit and then I shall come back again.
Dr. Josimuddin, you have to unmute your microphone, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Honorable Chair of the session, distinguished scholars and guests. It is an honor for me to share my thoughts with you on the activities of UNO in Bangladesh before getting membership on the historic speech of Bangabandhu in the General Assembly. All of you know that Bangabandhu delivered his speech in Bangla. With the presenters think it would be justified to speak a part of the paper in Bangla in honor of the speech of Bangabandhu. বঙ্গবন্ধুর জাতিসংঘ সাধারণ পরিষদে বঙ্গবন্ধুর ভাষণটি যেহেতু বাংলা ভাষায় দিয়েছিলেন সে কারণে আমরা আমাদের পেপারটা ইংরেজিতে কিন্তু একটি অংশ আমরা বাংলায় এই অনারে পড়ার চিন্তা করেছি তো সেই দিক থেকে কিছু অংশ আমরা বাংলায় পড়ব উপস্থাপন করব এবং বাকি অংশটা ইংরেজিতে উপস্থাপন করব দ্বিতীয় বিশ্বযুদ্ধের ধ্বংসস্তূপের উপর প্রতিষ্ঠিত হয় জাতিসংঘ এতে প্রতিফলন ঘটে সমগ্র মানব জাতির আশা আকাঙ্ক্ষা জাতিসংঘ সনদ অনুযায়ী এই বিশ্ব সংস্থার প্রধান উদ্দেশ্য হচ্ছে আন্তর্জাতিক শান্তি ও নিরাপত্তা বজায় রাখা বিভিন্ন জাতিসমূহের মধ্যে বন্ধুত্বপূর্ণ সম্পর্ক গড়ে তোলা জনগণের জীবনমান বৃদ্ধিতে সহায়তা দানের লক্ষ্যে একসঙ্গে কাজ করা এবং একে অন্যের অধিকার ও স্বাধিকার সমূহের প্রতি শ্রদ্ধা প্রদর্শনে উৎসাহ দান এবং এসব লক্ষ্য অর্জনে জাতিসমূহকে সহায়তা দানের একটি কেন্দ্র হিসেবে কাজ করা সনদের ৪ নং ধারা অনুসারে সনদে সংযোজিত বাধ্যবাধকতা পালনে ইচ্ছুক এবং শান্তিপ্রিয় যে কোনো রাষ্ট্র জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ লাভ করতে পারে নিরাপত্তা পরিষদের সুপারিশক্রমে সাধারণ পরিষদ নতুন সদস্য গ্রহণের বিষয়ে সিদ্ধান্ত গ্রহণ করে জন্মলগ্নে বাংলাদেশ রাষ্ট্রটি ছিল ক্ষুদ্র দরিদ্র ও দুর্বল এজন্য তখন বাংলাদেশের পররাষ্ট্র নীতির লক্ষ্য ছিল যত দ্রুত সম্ভব বিভিন্ন দেশের কূটনৈতিক স্বীকৃতি আদায় করা এবং বিভিন্ন আন্তর্জাতিক সংস্থার সদস্যপদ লাভ করা বাংলাদেশের মতো দরিদ্র ও দুর্বল দেশের জন্য জাতিসংঘের মতো আন্তর্জাতিক প্রতিষ্ঠানের সদস্যপদ লাভ কূটনৈতিক এবং অর্থনৈতিক উভয় দিক দিয়ে সর্বতোভাবে কাম্য ছিল বিষয়টির গুরুত্ব অনুধাবন করে ১৯৭২ সালের মার্চ মাসে বাংলাদেশ সরকার নিজ পৃষ্ঠপোষকতায় মানে বঙ্গবন্ধু সরকার নিজের পৃষ্ঠপোষকতায় ইউনাইটেড নেশনস অ্যাসোসিয়েশন অব বাংলাদেশ ইউএনএবি প্রতিষ্ঠিত করে এবং একই বছর আগস্ট মাসের ৮ তারিখে জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ প্রাপ্তির জন্য বঙ্গবন্ধু সরকার আবেদন করে কিন্তু ওই সময়ের ভূ রাজনীতি আঞ্চলিক রাজনীতি এবং দক্ষিণ এশিয়ার রাজনীতির সকল বিষয় নিয়ে বাংলাদেশকে প্রায় ২ বছর অপেক্ষা করতে হয় জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ প্রাপ্তির জন্য এ সময় সিকিউরিটি কাউন্সিলে বাংলাদেশ প্রসঙ্গটি উত্থাপিত হলে বিশেষ করে চীন এবং সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়ন নানান কিংবা চীন এবং ভার্সেস ভারত এরকম নানান দ্বন্দ্বে লিপ্ত হতে আমরা দেখি বাংলাদেশের সর্বশেষ ২ বছর পর বাংলাদেশের আবেদনটি নানান পরীক্ষা নিরীক্ষার পরে জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ পাওয়ার জন্য নিরাপত্তা পরিষদ থেকে সুপারিশ করা হয় এবং পরবর্তীতে ১৯৭৪ সালের সেপ্টেম্বর মাসে বাংলাদেশ জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ লাভ করে উল্লেখ্য আমাদের এই গবেষণা কর্মের উদ্দেশ্যটা হচ্ছে মুক্তিযুদ্ধকালীন বাংলাদেশ জাতিসংঘের জাতিসংঘ থেকে ওইভাবে সাধারণ পরিষদ কিংবা নিরাপত্তা পরিষদে ওইভাবে সহযোগিতা না পেলেও কেন বঙ্গবন্ধু সরকার জাতিসংঘকে এত বেশি পরিমাণে গুরুত্ব দিচ্ছিলেন সেটা জানা, এবং জাতিসংঘ বিশ্বশান্তি এবং নিরাপত্তা রক্ষায় আমাদের মানে জাতিসংঘকে কেন সবচেয়ে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ এবং একমাত্র সংগঠন হিসেবে ধরে নেওয়া সেই বিষয়টা তুলে ধরা। এই উদ্দেশ্য সাধনের জন্য আমরা সদস্যপদ প্রাপ্তির পূর্বে বাংলাদেশের জাতিসংঘের যে সকল কার্যক্রম ছিল সেগুলোর বিশ্লেষণ করেছি, এবং সাধারণ পরিষদে বঙ্গবন্ধুর যে ভাষণ, সেই ভাষণে যে সকল বিষয়ের উত্থাপন করা হয়েছে সে সকল বিষয়ের বিশ্লেষণের মাধ্যমে আমরা আমাদের উদ্দেশ্য সম্পর্কে গবেষণা প্রশ্ন যেটা সেটা সম্পর্কে আমরা জেনেছি। জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ প্রাপ্তির পূর্বেই বাংলাদেশ জাতিসংঘের বিভিন্ন সংস্থা এবং মহাসচিবের নিকট থেকে বিভিন্নভাবে সহযোগিতা পায়। মুক্তিযুদ্ধকালীন জাতিসংঘ হাইকমিশন ইউনাইটেড নেশনস হাইকমিশন ফর রিফিউজি শরণার্থীদের বিপুলভাবে সহযোগিতা করে, যা যুদ্ধ পরবর্তীকালেও অব্যাহত থাকে। লক্ষণীয় বিষয় হলো মুক্তিযুদ্ধ মানে 16ই ডিসেম্বর 1971 সালের পর, আমাদের বিজয়ের পর পশ্চিম পাকিস্তানে বসবাসরত আটকে পড়া বাঙালিদের বাংলাদেশে ফেরত পাঠানোর জন্য বঙ্গবন্ধু সরকার জাতিসংঘ মহাসচিবের নিকট পত্র লিখে, এমনকি জাতিসংঘ মহাসচিবের আহ্বানে সাড়া দিয়ে বিভিন্ন দেশ যুদ্ধ বিধ্বস্ত বাংলাদেশের পুনর্গঠনের জন্য সাহায্য প্রদান করে। এমনকি বাংলাদেশ এবং ভারতের যে সকল যুদ্ধবন্দী, মুক্তিযুদ্ধকালীন পাকিস্তানি যুদ্ধবন্দী ছিল, তাদের বিষয়টা মীমাংসা করার জন্য জাতিসংঘ মহাসচিব বিশেষ ভূমিকা রাখেন। জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ পাওয়ার পূর্বেই বিভিন্ন দেশের বাংলাদেশের দুর্গত এলাকায় খাদ্যসহ নিত্য প্রয়োজনীয় দ্রব্যাদি পরিবহনের জন্য জাতিসংঘ বাংলাদেশকে 8টি মালবাহী বিমান এবং 4টা হেলিকপ্টার পাঠায়। বাংলাদেশে জাতিসংঘের অনেক উচ্চপদস্থ কর্মকর্তা সদস্যপদ প্রাপ্তির পূর্বেই সফর করে, এমনকি জাতিসংঘ মহাসচিব নিজেও সস্ত্রীক বাংলাদেশ সফর করেন। এত সব ঘটনা এগুলো বাংলাদেশকে জাতিসংঘের গুরুত্ব প্রদানের বিষয়টাকেই পরোক্ষভাবে বলা যেতে পারে, গুরুত্ব দেওয়ার বিষয়টাই তুলে ধরা হয়েছে। বঙ্গবন্ধুর যে ভাষণ 1974 সালের 25 সেপ্টেম্বর জাতিসংঘে দেন সাধারণ পরিষদে, সেখানে বঙ্গবন্ধু শুরুতেই নিজে একা বলেন যে তিনি 7.5 কোটি বাংলাদেশি জনগণের প্রতিনিধিত্ব করছেন এই বিশ্ব সংস্থায়। সে বিষয়টি তিনি শুরুতেই তুলে ধরেন, এবং তারপর তিনি তাকে এখানে আসার জন্য এবং স্বাধীনতা সংগ্রামের জন্য যারা সর্বোচ্চ ত্যাগ স্বীকার করেছে এবং শান্তি এবং ন্যায় প্রতিষ্ঠার উদ্দেশ্যে এবং মানুষের আশা আকাঙ্ক্ষা বাস্তবায়ন উপযোগী একটা বিশ্ব গড়ে তোলার জন্য বাঙালি জাতি যে প্রতিশ্রুতিবদ্ধ, এবং জাতিসংঘ সনদের লক্ষ্য উদ্দেশ্যের সঙ্গে বাংলাদেশের স্বাধীনতা এবং মুক্তিযুদ্ধের বা স্বাধীনতা সংগ্রাম এবং মুক্তিযুদ্ধের লক্ষ্যের যে একাত্মতা রয়েছে সেই বিষয়টা তিনি তুলে ধরেন। এমনকি তিনি কৃতজ্ঞতা প্রকাশ করেন যে যাদের ত্যাগের বিনিময়ে তিনি বাংলাদেশ একটি স্বাধীন সার্বভৌম রাষ্ট্র হিসেবে প্রতিষ্ঠিত হয়েছে, তাদের প্রতি তিনি অভিবাদন জানান। বাংলাদেশের স্বাধীনতা সংগ্রামে যে সকল দেশ এবং জনগণ সমর্থন দিয়েছেন তাদের প্রতি তিনি কৃতজ্ঞতা প্রকাশ করেন। স্বাধীনতা সংহতকরণে এবং যুদ্ধ বিধ্বস্ত দেশের পুনর্গঠনে এখন যারা সহযোগিতা করছে তাদের প্রতি তিনি কৃতজ্ঞতা প্রকাশ করেন। জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ প্রাপ্তিতে বাংলাদেশকে যারা সহযোগিতা করেছে, সমর্থন জানিয়েছে, তাদের প্রতি তিনি আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ জানান। এরপর তিনি শান্তি এবং ন্যায় প্রতিষ্ঠার সংগ্রামের মুক্তির সংগ্রামে তার
You have, sorry to interrupt, you have one more minute.
Okay, thank you. এভাবে দেখা যাচ্ছে যে বঙ্গবন্ধু তার ভাষণে আণবিক যুদ্ধ যে সম্ভাবনা তৈরি হয়েছিল সারা পৃথিবীব্যাপী, সেটা থেকে বিজ্ঞান এবং কারিগরি যে অগ্রগতি সেটা মানব কল্যাণে ব্যবহারের জন্য এবং যুদ্ধের ধ্বংসলীলা এবং প্রাকৃতিক বিপর্যয় থেকে শুধু সারা পৃথিবীকে রক্ষার জন্য ক্ষুধা, দারিদ্র্য মুক্ত এবং দুর্ভিক্ষ মুক্ত পৃথিবী গড়ার জন্য তিনি জোর দেন। এবং সকলের জন্য যথাযথ একটি আন্তর্জাতিক অর্থনৈতিক ব্যবস্থা গড়ে তোলার কথা বঙ্গবন্ধু তার ভাষণে তুলে ধরেন। আমরা দেখি জাতিসংঘের 136তম রাষ্ট্র হিসেবে বাংলাদেশ সদস্যপদ পায় এবং স্থায়ী যুদ্ধকালীন দ্বিমেরুকেন্দ্রিক বিশ্ব ব্যবস্থার নানান আঞ্চলিক এবং আন্তর্জাতিক রাজনীতির সংকট মোকাবেলা করে বাংলাদেশকে জাতিসংঘের সদস্যপদ পেতে হয়। এবং বঙ্গবন্ধু সরকার এইটার জন্য বঙ্গবন্ধুর বলা যেতে পারে বঙ্গবন্ধুর যোগ্য নেতৃত্ব এবং তার নিরলস কূটনৈতিক প্রচেষ্টার ফলেই এই মানব জাতির সবচেয়ে বড় এই মহান পার্লামেন্টে বাংলাদেশকে বঙ্গবন্ধু ভাষণ দেওয়ার সুযোগ পান। সদস্য প্রাপ্তির 1 সপ্তাহের মধ্যেই বঙ্গবন্ধু এই ভাষণ দেন এবং জাতিসংঘের সাধারণ পরিষদের এই 29তম অধিবেশনে ছিল তার ভাষণটি ছিল বিশেষভাবে সকল বাংলাভাষী মানুষ ও স্বাধীন বাংলাদেশের জন্য এক অনন্য ঐতিহাসিক মুহূর্ত। কারণ একদিকে মাতৃভাষায় ভাষণ দানের মাধ্যমে বঙ্গবন্ধু যেমন নিজ দেশ সহ বিশ্বের সকল মানুষ তথা জাতির প্রতি মাতৃভাষার অনন্যতার বিষয়টি তুলে ধরেছেন, তেমনি বিশ্বের সকল স্বাধীনতাকামী, নির্যাতিত ও অধিকার বঞ্চিত মানুষের ন্যায়সঙ্গত অধিকার প্রতিষ্ঠার কথা বলেছেন বিশ্ব শান্তি এবং নিরাপত্তার কথা। বঙ্গবন্ধুর এই ভাষণে নবীন রাষ্ট্র বাংলাদেশের পররাষ্ট্রনীতির রূপরেখায় প্রতিফলিত হয়েছে এবং বাংলাদেশকে আন্তর্জাতিক সম্প্রদায়ের অন্যতম সদস্য দেশ হিসেবে প্রতিষ্ঠিত করে। বঙ্গবন্ধু চেয়েছিলেন ওই সময়ের বিশ্ব ব্যবস্থার ত্রুটি বিচ্যুতি সকলের সামনে তুলে ধরে তা দূর করতে, সকল মহলের সহযোগিতাপূর্ণ মনোভাব সৃষ্টি করতে, যে মহান ব্রত নিয়ে জাতিসংঘ প্রতিষ্ঠিত হয়েছিল তা পূরণ করতে, যাতে ক্ষুধা ও দারিদ্র্যমুক্ত এবং শান্তিপূর্ণ ও নিরাপদ বিশ্ব প্রতিষ্ঠিত হয়। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you, sir. Actually, we don't have any more time. Said Abu Saki sir, if you allow me, we can come back to you again later after the presentation
no
of two others.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you for your considerations. Now I would like to go for the third paper, Bangabandhu's foreign policy in the Middle East. GM Arifuzzaman, over to you. You have 8 minutes. Please maintain it for the sake of our discussant who will be joining us soon, and will give some discussions point on your paper. Thank you.
Clear now? Hello?
Okay, yes, we can see it.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Global Studies and Governance Independent University Authority, to giving me opportunity. And the time is very short, and I just want to present a paper on Bangabandhu's foreign policy in the Middle East. And this is, I think, this is very important issue. Sorry. This is very important issue in the diplomacy of Bangladesh. You know that the regime of Bangabandhu is counted from the 12th January to 15 August 1975, almost 3 years, 8 months. And in this time, Bangabandhu was very determined to reformation of economic, social, infrastructure development to build his dream, Sonar Bangla. And in this purpose, he was maintain a relationship with many countries all over the world, and Middle East is the very important countries, very important in global politics, you know. And Bangabandhu was tried in that regime to maintain some relationship with Middle East. Now I'm just discussing with this content, Middle East methodology, Bangabandhu and Middle East, some issues, and last conclusion. In Middle East, you know that in Middle East and according to United Nations, there are more 18 important countries in Middle East. I just want to skip this because of my lack of time. So my methodology was qualitative methodology, and I used both primary and secondary data for conducting my research. So I would like to go to the main theme of my presentation. In Saudi Arabia, you know that in 1970 on, the government of Saudi Arabia directly supported the Pakistan, but with the policy of the Bangabandhu friendship to all and managed towards done, Bangabandhu was tried to deal something else with Saudi Arabian King Faisal. And at first we know that it was not possible by the Bengali people to go to Hajj by using Bangladeshi passport before 1973.
And Bangabandhu looked on this issue first, and he sent a letter to King Faisal to request him so that Saudi Arab can allow the people of the citizen of Bangladesh as Bangladeshi passport directly for their horse, and he was successful. According to the Bangladesh Horse Management Portal, a total number of 6,512 Bengali people went horse in 1973 by year and both in the ocean part. And another issue was very important. Bangabandhu asked to recognize the King Faisal, but King Faisal gave a precondition, and he was focused that the People's Republic of Bangladesh should change just like as the Islamic Republic of Bangladesh. So Bangabandhu was rejected that thought, and in his dialogue we have found it Akhtar Mukul by his famous book Mujib-e-Rakhtoral. Mujib told it that this condition can, quote, this condition cannot be applied to Bangladesh, whereas the overwhelming majority of the population of Bangladesh is Muslim. We also have over 10 million non-Muslim, all participated together in our fight for freedom or suffered its consequences. Besides, Almighty Allah is not only for the Muslim, but He is the creator of the universe. Bangabandhu argued with the Saudi Arab to maintain relation, and he has tried to make a build-up relationship with Saudi Arab. Second, I would like to focus on Egypt. The president of the Egypt, Mr. Anwar Sadat, in an invitation of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Anwar Sadat visited Dhaka on 25 February 1974. It was just a 3-hour visit. And with that visit, a very good quote I have here to focus. Before leaving Dhaka, he told a one quote, let's initiate a new era. And this was a very important quote. And when he was leaving, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Anwar Sadat reached the airport using the same car. It was a strategy, a very strong strategy of Bangabandhu to make a strong relationship with Egypt. And we know that in later Egypt supported me in many sectors, both in working, both in economic and other sectors. Now I would like to go to Iraq. Yes, Iraq was the first Arab country who is recognized Bangladesh on 8 July 1972. And in that time, Gaddafi was the dictator at that time, and he was the predetermined to support Pakistan all times, and he just given a condition of Bangladesh to do the same Islamic Republic of Bangladesh, but Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman rejected this. And after the meeting of OIC, on the last day of OIC, he focused on the labor issue, he focused on the energy issue, etc., etc. And we have seen that in Iraq, a strong relationship was given a pathway by the Bangabandhu initiative. Now I'd like to go to the Kuwait. Kuwait has always a deep relationship with Bangladesh, and the two counterparts praised deep relationship. Father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and His Highness the Amir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmad Al Jabbar Al Sabah. They also recalled the visit of His Highness in 1974 and the Foreign Minister of Kuwait to the OIC Summit in Lahore in 1974. When they were meet, they have discussed the resources infrastructure, even to establish the Bangladesh economy, even to establish an economic zone in Bangladesh. And we know that Kuwait is a great market for the manpower of Bangladesh, and it was initiated by the Bangabandhu. Now I would like to go to the United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates was the first Gulf countries to recognize Bangladesh and establish diplomatic relations. Bangladesh opened its embassy in Abu Dhabi on March 23, 1974, and a historic meeting was held in 1974 between the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and the Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. And they laid a foundation how to build up a relationship with faith, history, culture, and tradition in between with United Arab Emirates and Bangladesh. Now I like to go to the Libya. Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in the time of the liberation of Bangladesh in 1970, Libya supported
Mr.
the
Arif,
Pakistan.
you have 2 more minutes.
Oh yes, thank you. uh, Libya supported the Pakistan. And in the 1973, during the NAM summit in Algiers, Bangabandhu discussed the recognition of Bangladesh, and he also
I think we have lost Arifuzaman. Arifuzaman, can you hear us? No. Then just wait for a few seconds. Otherwise, we can go to our fourth presenter. Right. I think let's move to our fourth presenter, Sheikh Shams Mursalin, Associate Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, and MD Saifullah Akan, Lecturer, Department of Japanese Studies. Over to you. Who will be presenting? Shams.
I'll be presenting.
All right. So you have, again, 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you. May I share my screen?
Absolutely. Sure. Please.
Okay. So, distinguished dignitaries and our honorable chair of this session, uh, honorable vice chancellor, honorable dean, and other respected participants. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. So, as you can see, our title of Mujibur Rahman, a theoretical analysis. So first we will begin, me, myself, and Mom. So first I would like to share the context of our study, why we want to study it, and what is the present scenario. So there are almost over 1,500 books on. So as you know, most of these books have been published in last 10, 12 years. And in this last Amor Ekushe book fair, there were 130 books released. And most of these books, these cover mainly poetry, essay, research, liberation war, adventure novel, and some are comics or kids books. But there are very least academic works, as I found, available on Bangabandhu's foreign policy in particular. And the available works that which are written on the foreign policy of Bangabandhu, they lack some theoretical analysis. So that's why we decided to analyze Bangabandhu's foreign policy from a theoretical perspective in a more academic way. So our research objective is to theoretically analyze the shaping of Bangladesh foreign policy under the able leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And we will be following qualitative analysis, and we want to collect data specifically from secondary sources, but if the situation allows, as we are passing through a serious pandemic, then we might go for some primary sources as well. Like we have a great historian here, living historian, Ambassador Zamir, once a professor, maybe. So he could be a very good source of it. So let's move on to our theoretical framework. So we consider particularly neoclassical realist tradition, 72 to 75. So while classical of things or events by ignoring the systemic pressures or systemic constraints, on the other hand, neorealists, they rely on exclusively on system level analysis. They ignore the unit level analysis. But on the other hand, neoclassical realism, as we consider it for our main theoretical tool here to analyze Bangabandhu's foreign policy, we consider it because of its utility, because neoclassical realism, it brings some sort of synthesis between both the classical realist and neo-realist tradition. And neoclassical realists, they attempt to understand foreign policy through focusing on particularly three variables. One is the relative power of the state in anarchic international system, which is said to be independent variable. The second one is domestic realities and perception and quality of leadership. And there are some other intervening variables, but we are focusing specifically on the domestic realities of the state, I mean Bangladesh, and the perception and quality of leadership, which means the perception and quality of leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman as intervening variable, and responses of the state in the international environment or the foreign policy outcome. This is the dependent variable, which means it depends on, as I've just mentioned. If I present it in a more, easier way, here it goes like this. First, independent variables, that means the relative distribution of power among the states within the anarchic international system. And we will be also considering the subsystem, that means the South Asian region as well. And then domestic constraints and leadership quality and perceptions. And finally, we will try to understand how this independent variable and intervening variables produce some dependent variable, the foreign policy outcomes of Bangladesh. It was the systemic and subsystemic realities during the time of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, from 1972 to 75. So the relative power distribution at systemic level was like this. USSR and USA were the superpowers or dominant powers, and the other great powers were UK, France, and China. Considering their membership in the Security Council, permanent membership in the Security Council. And there were other great powers as well in terms of economic
Shams,
superiority.
you have 2 more minutes.
Okay. Level, there we see India was the regional great power in South Asia, and newly independent Bangladesh was a small power based on its relative power distribution at both systemic and subsystemic levels. That means internationally and regionally. So this is some sort of global power hierarchy you can see. So I'm not gonna discuss it in detail. So let's move on to the intervening variables. So what were the domestic constraints during the time of Bangladesh? We didn't have international recognition. Sending back allied forces was a challenge. Issues relating to prisoners of war, war criminals, it was a burning issue. Then refugee issue, adoption of a new constitution and formation of new government was another issue. And fragile political institution was really a great challenge. And the weak security system or settings. So these were some domestic constraints politically, and economic realities were, as you know, the Time magazine mentioned in its article, like mourning after a nuclear attack. That was the situation of Bangladesh. Physical asset destroyed around Taka 1,257 crore. Population below poverty line were more than 70%, and home destroyed around 6 million, and so many of this devastating situation and severe shortage of food and other thing. So I'll specifically focus on this intervening variable, that means the leadership quality and perception of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So I put 4 qualities of leadership, charismatic leadership, and frontliner or frontline leader. Bangabandhu has a frontline leader. Visionary in the sense, a visionary leader is a person who has a clear idea of how the future should look like, which Bangabandhu has got. And then pragmatic in the sense, he focused on the practicality of the situation. That means, how do we get this done? That was his, idea, or that was his objective. And charismatic in the sense, a person is charismatic who utilizes his or her authenticity, communications, prose, and inspiration to pull out the best out of his subordinates, which he got in himself. And frontliner in the sense he led the whole foreign policy thing. I mean, the foreign policy, starting from foreign policy decision making to implementation process, straight from the front. He led from the front. So in that sense, frontliner.
Shams?
So this is the last slide.
Okay, please
Okay.
stick to a few seconds.
So foreign policy outcomes. What was the foreign policy outcomes? We were successful to convince India to withdraw their army. Then international recognition, we got most of the countries' recognition, international recognition during the time of Bangabandhu. Our per capita income increased from $93 to $179. And there were, we were engaged in different regional integration process, then reconstruction and development stimulated, and international negotiations and treaties like 1974 treaty or some other great treaties were done. And able to follow a balanced approach between the superpowers. So that's it. That were some, dependent variables of outcome of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are waiting for Ambassador Tariq Karim. He will be joining us soon. But in between sir, hello, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining now.
Yes, I must say, I will stop the moment Ambassador Tariq gets in. I've been in touch with him and he's trying to get online. And he's come back from a lunch that he had and he said he would be.
Sir, he's here already.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
We have not heard from Professor Shakir. Maybe you can add 1 minute or 2 minutes. You can finish your part and then we will go to hear from Ambassador Tariq Karim. Professor Shakir, you have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for considering 2 minutes again. Actually, my colleague already had mentioned about the objective of the research, where he said that through our work, we shall try to understand why Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman emphasized so much on United Nations and how he showed the role of United Nations. And his maiden speech was remarkable, definitely, and it was admired by the international community. And I want to quote from Dr. Kamal Hussain. He calls from his memory that he wrote that some delegates took off their headphones in excitement. One of them even told me that Bangla language sounds so lively and fun that they could get the message right across even without understanding the meaning of the words that he was saying. So this is how the first speech, the only speech of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman touched the heart of the people who were attending the session of the General Assembly in the 29th session of the United Nations. And through his remarkable speech, Bangabandhu actually portrayed the scenario of the third world countries and asked the United Nations member country representatives to take one step forward to resolve all the miseries of the people living in the underdeveloped part of the world. Bangabandhu reminded them of their duties and demanded the economic and social rights of the people. Actually, this is how he tried to show the world that Bangladesh is not alone. Rather, there are a lot of people in different corners of the world who want justice and who want to improve their life. And this actually was throughout his speech. And this is how Bangabandhu tried to show the world that through the process through which Bangladesh got the victory, and together we can bring a better world. We can change the world. And this is how, through the historic speech given in the United Nations, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman represented the world. And this is how he wanted to show the world that he dreamed of a Sonar Bangla, and not just a Sonar Bangla. He wanted to tell the world that he wants a new world which will be free from all sorts of dictatorial rule and oppression. Thank you very much. I didn't take more time. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Shaki sir. We lost GM Arifuzaman and he could not conclude. Maybe a few seconds for you to conclude.
Thank you for giving me opportunity. I just read out some lines from my paper. For the shortest time of regime, it was not possible by Bangabandhu to make a strong bondage with many Middle East countries. In my view, Pakistan was defeated for two times by Bangladesh. One is directly in December 1971 and another one in February 1974. In the time of independence war, many Middle East countries supported the West Pakistan. Then the Bengali was able to defeat them through war, braveness, and diplomatic tactics. Another in 1974. Besides many components, Bangabandhu was able to gain support from many Middle East countries who pressurized the Pakistan government to recognize Bangladesh. This is the strongness of the foreign diplomacy of Bangabandhu in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your brief addition. Now I would like to request Ambassador Tariq Korim to take up and discuss about these 4 papers. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marufa. First of all, good afternoon to everybody. My profuse apologies also to everyone that I could not join from the inception of this webinar today on a very important subject. My greetings to my old friend and distinguished colleague, Ambassador Zamir, who's chairing it. And I thank Professor Imtiaz Hussain for having invited me and insisted that I somehow come and participate. Because of some prior commitment, I could not come right at the beginning. I had agreed to the earlier date. However, I'm happy to be here. I received the abstracts of the 4 papers, so 4 papers. And it's difficult to arrive at a conclusive sort of comment or discuss conclusively what I can derive from the abstracts. They are in in fact, they are also in somewhat outline form. However, I did have the opportunity of listening to a little bit towards the part of Mr. Shams Mursalin's paper and to the additional couple of minutes that Mr. Arifuzaman and Mr. Shakir spoke. I think, let me add my general comments in a sense, having straddled both the world of practitioners for almost 40 years and the academic world also for almost a decade. Trying to put in a box the foreign policy of any country or how the foreign policy of a leader is evolved would be a fallacy. Countries, like leaders, have a personality. They evolve in a certain manner. They are shaped by certain events. They are shaped by their environment. And by environment, I mean the geopolitical and geophysical environment and location. And in a sense, I have argued that our foreign policy actually was defined by our founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. I had the rare opportunity and privilege and honor of serving in the headquarters at a time when our foreign policy was being formulated from early 1972 onwards until 1975. And I had the privilege and great honor actually to accompany Bangabandhu on several of his trips abroad to the Middle East. I also had the privilege of actually working with some of the senior colleagues, my mentors in the foreign ministry, in drafting some of the speeches which actually reflected what we thought of ourselves and how we saw our role in this world. So in a sense, I would say that Bangabandhu's foreign policy, his entire life was devoted to struggling for the Bengali nation and their emancipation, first from the British colonial rule and then from the Pakistani colonial rule. And the UN speech that Mr. Shakir just mentioned a little while ago, in a sense, brings together all the elements of his personal experiences as well as his political experiences, as well as his experiences in nation building. From the early stages after he had got the nation that he had struggled for so long, become a reality. And in the UN speech that Mr. Shakir mentioned about, for instance, you will see at least half a dozen, if not more, references to the rights of the people, the individual, whether they are peoples, to self-determination, their right to choose their own future, their right to express themselves, their right to justice, their right to eradicate poverty. All these are there. And this is what he was actually struggling for. This encapsulates his entire life struggles. He wanted, why did we want to leave Pakistan? Because we felt that we were being deprived of our rights as human beings, our economic rights, our political rights, our cultural rights. And so in a sense, all that came together in the reflection. Number two, he, I think, understood better than others that we are born into a certain milieu, a geopolitical and geophysical milieu. Okay, what is around us, we cannot change that neighborhood. The neighborhood is there. We have to now reconfigure ourselves and how we relate to this neighborhood and to the larger world. And so early in his, after he had returned to Bangladesh, I think early in 72, in a visit to Kolkata, at a public speech, he referred that we are in a neighborhood, we need to have better relationships among neighbors and we need to have cooperative relationship with the neighbor. Because he understood very well that nobody can develop or grow in isolation. You have to grow with everybody else. And so, although the wide idea is wide-ranging, he had not given the parameters of how it will be revolved. But the idea was, he was very clear that we need to have peace and good relations with the neighbors. So I think in a sense, it derives from there. Justice, yes, the long litany of injustice that was perpetrated on Bengalis during the Pakistan period, but even earlier on a community by other community, that weighed heavily in his mind. And therefore, in the UN speech, time and again, I think there are 6 or 7 places, paragraphs, in which the word justice leaps out at you. That this is a world we have to reconfigure with justice being at the bottom foundation of it. Now, so I would caution that when you are trying to analyze foreign policy, a leader or an individual, I think one of the early lessons I learned from my own mentors as a practitioner is that to try and deal with the person sitting across you in the table, whether he represents another country or another region, is to try and put yourself in his feet, literally, and insert yourself in his mind. What is it that makes him tick? What is it that makes him behave the way he does? And if you understand that, you will also be able to address what is bothering him and maybe address yourselves and your issues to make him understand that you're also coming from a certain place. And so we need to have a mutual accommodation where we are both leave the table satisfied with each other. Okay, so I think the word, I think pragmatism, I think Mr. Shams Mursaleen mentioned 4 attributes of Bangabandhu. And pragmatism was the second attribute. Then there was, of course, charisma and leadership, etc. Charisma, certainly, a leader without charisma cannot achieve what he wants to achieve. You can have many leaders saying the same things, but somehow they will not be able to capture the imagination either of their own audience domestically or of the audience overseas that they're addressing. And I personally accompanying him on some of the trips, the charisma was awesome. I mean, it's this word does not describe completely in any manner, and I think Ambassador Zamir will testify to this also. Uh, in the Middle East, and maybe I should say a word about the Middle East before going to that. Middle East largely had not recognized us. They were going by the Pakistani propaganda that this was a Hindu India which had deliberately split off a Muslim Pakistan for its own ends, and that the people would rise up. Okay, and we, in fact, almost none of the Islamic countries had recognized us. So in 1974, Bangabandhu dispatched the foreign minister and a small team, of which the Director General and I were part, to visit the Middle East countries to seek recognition. And we started with going to Bahrain. When the aircraft landed in Bahrain, and that was the first country, we started from there. Dr. Kamal Hussain was seated right in front of me. I was seated next to my Director General, Mr. Abul Hassan, a very mentor to whom I owe a lot personally, and whose handiwork you will see in many of our communiques and speeches of those early 5 years. And from him, I acquired some of the tools of that. And Dr. Kamal Hussain mentioned, God knows how they will receive us. So I was looking out of the window. I happened to be sitting next to the window. And I said, sir, you don't have to worry because I see an honor guard there and I see 2 flagpoles there with our flag flying. And I see a military or a police band out there. So I think you don't have to worry because this is not here to give us any other message, but to greet us with full honors. And that's what happened. Now, in some places, we had problems. The reason why he reached out to the Middle Eastern countries was very important. Remember the time when we were born, 1971. That is immediately after the first oil shock that the global economy suffered. When the entire global economy went upside down, the petrodollars ruled, OPEC cartel was formed, and they were ruling how the rest of the world would go. And we had only one refinery, the refinery in Chittagong, dependent on Agajari crude, which was light crude, not light crude, heavy crude from the Iranian oil fields, full of sulfur. And you can't change the refining capacity of any refinery overnight. If you have designed it for a certain type of crude with a certain specific gravity and certain contents, you cannot get something which is totally different. Okay, and we needed. Iran was a country about which we were not sure. Well, our mission to Iran was also very successful, and they agreed to not only establish relationship, but also to keep providing the crude oil that we needed for our refinery. But we needed more. And the more would come from different places, different Gulf countries. They were awash in oil. And he understood the economic importance of reaching out to these countries, apart from establishing the fact that we are an independent, secular nation. We have broken away from Pakistan, but that does not abjure, or we do not deny that we have a Muslim civilization, which is part of our character. And so he understood the importance, and that is why he also he was successful in negotiating that. When he went to the first OIC meeting, he did so on his terms. The 4 senior leaders, the Gulf leaders who came, when he said, I will join provided you accept me on my terms, that I'm the leader, this is an independent state, and I will be received there, although we fought with them, with due honors, with the national anthem being played and our flag flying as it should be floor. So, these were points
Sir,
which were
sir,
foremost in his mind. Now, when he went to
sir.
just 1 minute and then I'll wind up.
Gee, sir, you have 2 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I'm about to wind up in any case. I was mentioning about the charisma. Now, when we accompanied, we were negotiating a major oil deal because we were not sure whether the Iranians would turn off the tap at any given time because of the very, very close relationship with Pakistan in those days under the RCD and the CENTO alliances that the two countries were partners. And we wanted to line up supplies from the UAE. And our joint secretary and secretary, foreign secretary and others, we had struggled with them. But, there was a fixation. There was a wall that we ran against. At the senior officials meeting, we could not agree to the communique. Then, lo and behold, Bangabandhu has a meeting with the Emir, Sultan Nahyan, Zayed bin Sultan, and they come into the room, everything is resolved. They're both beaming, no contestations on any aspect, not a comma, not a semicolon, not a word change of what we had presented to them. That was the charisma. I saw that happen again and again, in whether it was in Kuwait or in Baghdad or in Egypt, the same thing. His initially, I can also mention that when I went to South Africa, our liberation movement inspired other liberation movements. The South African leaders whom I met, and quite a few of them, I mean, they had two types of leaderships. One who were freedom fighters on the ground fighting physically on the soil of South Africa. And then there was a huge team who were fighting for it from outside South Africa, in capitals in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And the leadership, the expatriate leaders who came back, I met several of them. And they said, look, your struggle for liberation and the leadership that Bangabandhu provided inspired us. The South African Soweto uprising was a direct offshoot of how our language movement inspired their language movement. And until the Soweto movement, the South African movement was not going anywhere. So again, that was a movement based on language and the primacy of their own culture. So these are the things that set our foreign policy, I think. So we should be careful, and that's what I learned straddling the world, both of academia and practitioners. Both complement each other, but neither should seek to try and interpret international relations and foreign relations entirely from one box. We cannot box ourselves in. Practitioners without a theoretical foundation and background will not understand many of the nuances of how they work. And theoreticians working only from a theoretical base will not understand how these theories apply on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have a few questions from our students. So actually, I don't want to dishearten them. So just one or two questions. Amjad, our lecturer Amjad, is going to share the question briefly. And I would request presenters to answer very briefly. And then we can conclude the sessions. And at the end, Dr. Imtiaz Hussain, Dean, School of Liberal Arts and Social Science, will share the closing remarks. Amjad.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Marufa. At first, I would like to thank our respected chair, presenter, discussant, and dear guest for these scintillating presentations full of information and food for thought. However, I can see we have some questions from the audience. The first one is to Sheikh Shams Mursalin. The question is, can the new classical approach explain the perception of Bangabandhu used by the leading political party Awami League in Bangladesh? And the second question is to Ambassador Tariq Karim, sir. The question is, what do you think Bangabandhu's action response model or priority approach would be for the current pandemic in contrast that of our present government? Thank you, sir.
Uh, I would request Sheikh Shams, you answer in 1 minute, please.
Can you hear me?
Ji, yes, we can hear.
Okay, well, I will explain the thing using the neoclassical realism because of its utility, as I have mentioned. The first thing is that it has got the systemic constraints, it considers it, and also the unit level, realities is being. There is a synthesis between unit level and systemic level constraints or actors formulated is easier. I consider it explained with neoclassical realism and intervening variable and the domestic constraints. Specifically, there are many more intervening variables there. So I will focus specifically on these to help us to the devastated country, shortage of food and other things. All that, the reality and the main focus will be on the charismatic, pragmatic, and visionary leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. We have identified 4 qualities, and there could be many more, thousands of qualities, but we have just put 4 qualities in front. And with those qualities, along with his perception about the systemic level, the domestic constraints, considering all this, we will try to show how foreign policy was formulated and implemented under the leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Tariq, sir, you have a few seconds to answer, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. That's a hypothetical question in a sense, because when you have a pandemic like this, of this order that we are experiencing, this pandemic is a once in a century pandemic or once in a lifetime. Well, lifetime is, I think once in a century describes it more. The last similar pandemic we had was exactly a little over 100 years ago. However, as I mentioned, Bangabandhu had to face, before partition, the trauma of the Bengal famine, which was in the early 40s. Okay, and what was his reaction there? He went out for community work to help our people who were starving. He faced a sort of a food crisis, a severe drought, and a sort of famine conditions, even when in Bangladesh period in 1974. And I think, again, his concern was for the people. Is the state, is the government, are the bureaucrats, are everybody doing enough to alleviate the cause of the people? Now, each crisis that happens during a certain time, the leadership has to weigh in many things. Bangabandhu's, I think, the approach to these problems, which affect the ordinary man, his citizens, his children, more or less, as he said. I think if you examine his speech at the first passing out parade of the Bangladesh Military Academy in January 1975, gives a very clear indication of who he was pointing fingers at and who he was telling that you better mend your ways because I'm going to start cracking down. And he looked at the civil servants behind him, the ministers behind him, the political party workers behind him, And he told the army that you have to be disciplined. As a nation, we have to unite and come together to be disciplined. So I take my cue from there. Now, are we meeting all those assignments or all those parameters that he set? And I have to say that Bangabandhu perhaps was embarking on those measures when he was assassinated. Perhaps there were elements who feared that they would be affected otherwise. Whatever it is, I'm not going to go into that dark area. So every leadership has to configure the situation obtaining on the ground. You cannot devise a policy in isolation from where you exist and what the situation and conditions are and say, this is the best thing, this is how we will do. A lot of factors have to be woven into how you devise your policy and where you go, where you are supposed to go. And in a sense, perhaps we haven't done too badly, although it is difficult to give a definitive answer, but we haven't done too badly. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are almost at the end. Although we have few students' questions, but I just leave it for the moment and we go to the concluding session. Now I would like to request Professor Dr. Imtiaz Hussain, Dean Acting, School of Liberal Arts and Social Science, and Professor and Head, Global Studies and Governance, GHG program. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. I would like to begin by first saying that Dr. Maroof has done a lioness's job navigating through so many stumbling blocks today. My first congratulations to her. As a professor, I have to say something on the substance mentioned today, couple of minutes maybe, and then as the welcoming address spokesman of the panel, a couple of minutes. Bear with me, I'll finish very quickly. The third global day ends here. It was at the crossroads of three themes, three forces. The first is that it is a commemoration of UN Day, which this year from October 24th will emphasize food and health. For those of you looking for thesis topics, food means there are at least two areas of tension. One is that climate change is reducing arable land. How are we going to make it rest of this century? The second one is the tension between genetically modified food and natural food. Pay some attention to these two over the year. The second UN theme is health. Fourth industrial revolution is the first that is not using physical labor, the physical input. And therefore, by shifting completely to intellectual input, we need to pay a lot more attention to things like education and so forth. This is where the health attention will be shifting, and food is going to be a big part of it. The second dynamic that we are at today is the pandemic. And here there's another tension. One is what we call social distancing. If you look at it carefully, it is really all forms of discrimination, all forms of it, not just social, all kinds. And on the other hand, we have to boost production, put unemployed people back to work. And therefore, automation is the only way out. And there's a huge tension here, automation versus social distancing. We will see it in our R&D factories and elsewhere. It's a balance we have to fight with. But the big theme for today is the third one, and this is Bangabandhu. The 100th anniversary, certainly. We had four presenters, two of them focused on theory, two on empirical studies, especially the ones on United Nations and the Middle East. I think there's a lot of mileage. I particularly like Arifuzzaman's paper, especially the countries that you had in the Middle East. What I might suggest to you is that instead of looking at countries one by one, why don't you pick dimensions and then compare them along those dimensions? That would make it a powerful paper. The two theoretical opens up a huge chapter that has not been done in the literature, pitting the constructivist view against the neorealism view. It has not been done in South Asia, and you could be the first if the two paper presenters get together and work on it. And I would really encourage you to pay some attention to that. One final comment on that is that the paper that was by our two Jahangirnagar University colleagues, you might want to rethink a little bit because number one, it was all read out. If you're reading out, we're not getting analytical mileage. I have not paid much attention to those. Second thing is that when you're presenting, we would like students, please go down to the level of the student audience and then raise them to your level. And therefore, if you're bringing them to your territory first, by going to Bangla, you might be losing the audience. And therefore, think of that in future presentations. Um, I would like to move then to the appreciation for everyone doing this today. First, I go to all the technicians and technocrats, to all the faculty, students, and particularly majors of global studies. You've done a tremendous amount of work. Thank you ever so much. The night has only just begun. I would like next to go to our two ambassadors. And what can I say about them? And here I'm going to also appeal to our Vice Chancellor. We have two eminent ambassadors with so rich experiences right from the beginning of this country. We need to capture them. What do we have a library for? Can we get them down, take interviews, take their memories and make volumes out of them and keep them in that library? 20, 30 years later, researchers will be coming to IUB to look at those. I really recommend it, and particularly Ambassador Zamir, you knock me out every time you speak, which is why I think you must settle down. And as director of Center for Pedagogy, I would like to capture all those memories, write a book as your memory of everything that you have been through. I can speak to Ambassador Tariq as I do always. As some of you might know, he is opening up the Bay of Bengal Institute. This is the first of its kind. And all of you kindly pay some attention to that. That is going to be what the vision of Bangabandhu was headed for. And you can make it really gel, give it substance, open territory, new research, lot can be done. I'd like you to get hold of Ambassador Tariq and see what you can do. Finally, I would like to go to our Rock of Gibraltar. It lies somewhere between Slovenia and Bangladesh. Our Vice Chancellor, without him, we would not have all of these. The huge amount of effort he's putting to push academic work, and certainly something we're very grateful for. Thank you, Dr. Parvan, for coming and blessing these scholars in all of this. Finally, we have scheduling for the rest of the day. The next panel is about the health, the pandemic itself, with Rohingyas and so many other dimensions. And this is where you will hear all the specialists and some from IUB. Please stay for that. And then we go back to Bangabandhu in the evening, and that's going to be a star-studded panel. I would like to welcome all of you. Please come, and thank you all ever so much. Please make this a part of your future. And students, majors of global studies, I have a little surprise for you, but there's no harm in you waiting till 8 o'clock to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I want to conclude the session. Before I conclude, just want to let you know that this program is on live on Facebook, IUB Facebook page and YouTube. So you can also see later on. And also you can see the other two panels of today online on YouTube and Facebook Live. So I would like to conclude here and thank you everyone to be here and bear with me. Khudafaz and good afternoon and see you in the next panel.